There are three general reasons why companies have a policy on alcohol and drugs. The first one is our overall responsibility to manage the railway safely. Secondly, to meet our obligations under the Transport and Works Act. And lastly, because it makes good business sense. The principal obligation under the Transport and Works Act that the members of the railway group have is to exercise what's called due diligence. And what that means is that we are constantly aware of the risks that we face, and we keep reminding our staff and providing other means to control the risk day after day, week after week. It isn't something we do once and forget about it.
Our aims have to be a little bit bigger than purely what's good in law. There are many areas where going a little bit further is good for all the individuals concerned.
The public expectation of safety is very, very high, and therefore we have a responsibility to have this policy and to apply it fairly.
I think it's important that the railway industry is seen to be meeting high standards consistently. It is certainly what our customers expect from us, and I think we, as employees within that industry, also expect to be able to offer the best.
There's no doubt at all that by having an effective policy that is actually working, business performance can be improved. Until privatisation came about on the railways, we were all covered by the British Railways Board's policy on alcohol and drugs. Since then, a number of train operating companies have varied their policies. The changes come about in the application of the penalties that can be incurred by breaching the policy, and it's absolutely essential that all members of staff are aware of their own company's specific variations in this area. The legislation and the policy doesn't just apply to train operating companies' employees, it also applies to Railtrack staff and all the many contractors that work on the railway these days. If you were a contractor and you turned up under the influence of alcohol, then you could certainly expect to be dealt with in the same way as railway staff.
As a doctor, I would say there's no difference between alcohol, illegal drugs and legal drugs. They're all drugs. What we're interested in a railway context is drugs that might affect your performance at work. By performance we mean one's ability to concentrate, one's ability to make critical judgments and remain vigilant. Drugs that enhance performance are a myth. There's very good evidence that cannabis affects performance in tasks which are critical to railway safety, such as the judgment of distances. Many people will be aware that cannabis is particularly long-lasting in the body. It can persist for up to 6 weeks. So if you work on the railway, recreational use of cannabis is out of the question.
The consumption of alcohol is a much more difficult area to monitor and to understand, and therefore in the new booklet we lay down some guidelines that staff should observe in terms of the number of units of alcohol they drink and the timescales before they come to work. And we strongly advise people to have a look at that and to understand the general principles.
If people don't consider their use of alcohol, even in minimal amounts within the working environment, then they are prone to making silly little errors. And as we all know, silly little errors can lead to fairly major accidents.
Alcohol's the classic example of a drug where people feel as though they're performing better than they actually are, especially at relatively low doses. Obviously at a very high dose we can all see that someone's staggering around, but at a low dose the person may feel that they're performing better, but in fact their decisions will not be as carefully considered.
The adverse effects of too much alcohol are well known, and the booklet does specify some of those. So follow the guidance in the book and look after your health at the same time as staying within your company's policy.
Speeds of elimination of drugs vary tremendously with the individual and the circumstance in which the substance is taken, so it is difficult to make generalisations. I think the guidance in the book obviously is there to help people make their own decisions about how to use legitimate substances such as alcohol safely. We're not saying that you can't drink alcohol, we're saying you're entitled to drink it, you're entitled to drink it to excess if you wish, but we'd like you to keep it away from the railway environment.
If someone comes in feeling the worst effects of the night before, then they are not able to perform either to their best or to meet our customers' expectations. So all we ask in this policy is that you consider or manage your consumption to ensure that you are fit for work the next day.
The first area when staff will encounter the policy is actually before employment, because all companies screen potential employees for the misuse of drugs. A further occasion when testing may take place is if a member of staff turns up for work and their supervisor believes that they may be under the influence of alcohol or drugs. The staff who are in safety critical posts have to be particularly careful where alcohol and drugs are concerned. Firstly, when you seek promotion to a new post or transfer to another safety critical post, you'll be subjected to the screening process. Secondly, if you're involved in an incident, the screening process will also apply. And thirdly, each company sends a percentage of its safety critical staff for random screening each year, so you could well be picked up through that system as well. If a train operating company requests police attendance, or the police believe that there is reasonable suspicion that alcohol and drugs have influenced an incident, they will also seek to have the employee tested. If a member of staff declines to take a test without good reason, then they will be dismissed in line with their company policy. If a collecting officer is called to an incident, they have to follow a very strict process, and likewise at the laboratory the testing process is very, very robust. Therefore the likelihood of any abuse of the system is absolutely minimal, and staff have nothing to fear.
I'm very happy that the system that is operated is designed firstly to make sure that your sample can't be mixed up with anybody else's, and secondly that your sample can't be interfered with between it leaving your site and being tested in the laboratory. The sample will be divided into two in your presence and sealed in your presence. Both of those sample pots will go to the laboratory, but the laboratory will retain one of those samples sealed, untouched, for a period of at least a year in the event of the first sample testing positive.
If the police actually carry out the testing, then you're obliged under the policy to provide your supervisor or local manager with a printed copy of the police report. It's not just using illegal drugs that is an issue. Being in possession is also a criminal offence and can incur the penalties laid down in the policy booklet. I think it's important to point out that the police will use their discretion in incidents where the misuse of alcohol or drugs are concerned, and they will be looking for reasonable suspicion before they take any action. They're not here to catch out railway staff. If a sample that a member of staff provides does contain a trace of drugs or indeed solvents, which are a common substance of abuse these days, the likelihood is that they will be dismissed by their company. But it's critical that briefers do go through their company variations with staff at briefing sessions.
Our policy on misuse of drugs is not a grey area. It does not take account of changing social tolerance to some recreational drugs. As far as we are concerned as train operating companies, if it is not legal within the country, it is certainly not acceptable within the railway industry.
And if a member of staff is tested for alcohol and they're above the level stated by their company, their normal disciplinary process will apply, and that will very likely mean that the member of staff will be dismissed.
Alcohol and drugs and the railways do not mix.
If the member of staff who fails the test is in a safety critical post, they will be taken out of that safety critical post. Their safety critical work card will certainly be withdrawn, and they may well face dismissal subject to the company policy.
Why risk your career on 1 minute's enjoyment?
If a member of staff is found guilty of endangering the railway as a result of the misuse of alcohol or illegal drugs, they could certainly face prosecution, maybe go to prison, or face a very heavy fine. So the penalties are very severe indeed.
If you're in what the railway calls a safety critical post, then you must declare to your manager something which you believe could have an effect on your fitness for work.
If a member of staff is prescribed a drug or medicine by their doctor, or indeed they buy something across the counter at the chemist's, they must make it clear that they work on the railway, particularly if they're in a safety critical post, and they should follow the doctor's instructions very carefully.
Drugs to help you sleep or relax are obviously the most important. Most of those are still on prescription. Lots of the things available over the counter that might cause drowsiness. Simple cold remedies, cough medicines, medicines for diarrhea or tummy pains, and hay fever medication. If you're being prescribed a drug, then it's important to make sure that your doctor knows the job you do. You may think he or she knows, but he may not have the records open at that page that day, so it's always important to say, "Doctor, I'm a train driver," or whatever. Is this prescription you're giving me likely to affect my fitness for work? The next port of call is the label on the medication itself. If it carries a clear warning that is relevant to your work, do not drive, may cause drowsiness, do not operate machinery, then obviously your fitness for work is very much in doubt. I think if you're beginning to have a problem keeping alcohol or a legitimate drug away from work, or you have a problem with an illegal drug, then the golden rule is to declare it and be honest about it. I think it's fair to say that most companies in the railway have an enlightened attitude and will want to help you. As a doctor, certainly, I want to prevent problems. I don't want to be picking up the pieces afterwards. I want to prevent things getting out of hand. But the golden rule is be upfront, be honest, and you can be helped. Always ensure that someone who's supplying you with a drug, prescribed or bought over the counter, is aware of the job you do, and that can then advise you on the likely effects that it will have. And if you're at all unsure as to whether it will or will not have an adverse effect at work, declare it to your supervisor as soon as possible.
I think the key message to come out of the policy is to remember that your safety is at stake, as well as the safety of your colleagues and the travelling public, and to understand the guidance in the booklet very carefully and to apply it sensibly in your day-to-day life as a minimum standard.
We are performing better than most industries because we've had a base policy in place for a number of years now. And all our employees are aware of that policy and aware of how it is managed and how it is monitored. However, there is always a danger that unless we keep re-briefing that policy, that newcomers to the industry, and the industry is going through change at the moment, that vigilance may slip.